Welcome to The Explainer. We all think we know what power is, right? It's in governments, it's in laws, it's in leaders. But what if the ultimate source of all that authority isn't on earth at all? Today, we're diving into a really different way of looking at power, from the perspective of a citizen of heaven, and what that actually means for how we live in the world. So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to walk through 5 big ideas. We'll kick things off with a question that has shaped all of human history. Then we'll look at this unseen cosmic battle, and we're going to land on a final conclusion about power that honestly might just change how you see everything. All right, let's just jump right in with the big one. This is a question that sits at the very heart of every government, every society, every revolution. Where does power, where does authority actually come from? Yeah, we're all familiar with the usual answers, aren't we? Power comes from the people who vote. Or it comes from a nation's constitution, the law, or maybe it's the government institutions themselves. Or if you go way back, it came from a king or queen. These are the earthly structures we can actually see and touch. But what if all of those are just secondary sources? The source material we're looking at today presents a pretty radical idea, that every single form of earthly authority, no exceptions, has a single origin point, and it's heavenly. And you know what? That changes everything. This very question was thrown at Jesus by the religious leaders of his day. I mean, they saw him acting with this incredible power, and they wanted to know, where did you get this from? But instead of giving them a straight answer, Jesus just turns the tables on them with a question of his own. And this is where it gets brilliant. By asking them about John the Baptist, Jesus forces them to pick between only 2 possible sources of authority, heaven or humanity. And as you can see, they were trapped. Both answers were politically impossible for them. They couldn't answer, which basically proved they didn't really get what authority was all about. And then later, we finally get the direct answer when he's standing before the Roman governor, the ultimate symbol of earthly power. Jesus makes this incredible statement: "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above." This is the core idea. All earthly authority is just delegated from a higher heavenly source. So, okay, if all authority comes from heaven, that brings up another question, right? Why does the world seem so chaotic and broken? Well, this leads us to the idea of an unseen conflict, a battle for influence between 2 rival spiritual kingdoms. This worldview suggests that behind every single earthly system, whether it's politics or finance or culture, there's a spiritual influence at play. It's either being influenced by the kingdom of light or the kingdom of darkness. The real battle, then, isn't what we see on the nightly news. It's this deeper, spiritual tug of war. Jesus himself actually acknowledged this whole dynamic during his arrest. He told the officials, "This is your hour, when darkness reigns." That implies that the kingdom of darkness has its own authority and its own moments to exercise that power here on earth. Okay, so this brings things from this giant, cosmic scale right down to the personal level. If this spiritual conflict is for real, what's the role of an individual person in all of it? This is where the whole concept of the heavenly citizen comes in, someone who has a specific job to do, a mandate from heaven. This completely reframes the identity of a believer. It's not just about being a member of a church. It's about understanding yourself as a citizen of a completely different kingdom, an ambassador who has a specific mission and delegated authority. And the source material lays out a very clear chain of command for this authority. It flows from God the Father, who gives all authority to Jesus Christ. And then Jesus, in turn, delegates that very same authority to his followers, to the church. So this delegated authority, it isn't for personal gain or for some kind of earthly conquest. It has a very, very specific purpose: to carry out a rescue mission. The goal, what's sometimes called the Great Commission, is to invite people to move out of the kingdom of darkness and into the kingdom of light. And right here, we see the tools for that mission. Believers are given the keys of the kingdom. This means they have the authority to bind or prohibit the works of darkness and to loose or permit the work of heaven right here on earth. It's the language of actively getting involved in the spiritual conflict. Well, this obviously creates some tension, right? How does a citizen of heaven who has heavenly authority live under the laws and authority of an earthly government? How does the church keep its spiritual focus when there are all these disputes about who's in charge? This is a central question, one that people have been debating for centuries, and the scriptures themselves can sometimes seem to present conflicting views on this, which has led to a lot of confusion. So on one hand, like we saw in Mark and John, Jesus is constantly saying that ultimate authority comes from heaven, and he often says it in a way that challenges earthly rulers. But then, on the other hand, you have the Apostle Paul in the book of Romans, who commands believers to submit to governing authorities because they're established by God. So, which one is it? The way these ideas come together is subtle, but it's so important. Believers are called to submit to the function of government. It's God-given job to create order and justice. But their ultimate allegiance is always to heaven. This means the main battle isn't about protesting government officials. It's about spiritually fighting against the dark influences that try to corrupt the systems those officials are running.
Okay, so let's take this one final crucial step further. If the believer's authority is spiritual, what is the ultimate expression of that power? The answer? Well, it might surprise you.
The source argues that this whole hierarchy of power, it doesn't just stop with heavenly decrees or spiritual warfare. There's an even higher law, a supreme principle that governs absolutely everything in the kingdom of heaven. And what's really fascinating here is that the Apostle Paul drops this profound statement right in the middle of his discussion about submitting to earthly authority. He says that love is the complete fulfillment of all law. And this is the ultimate takeaway. The highest expression of authority in the entire universe isn't force or control. It's not even the spiritual power to command. It is the transformative, self-sacrificial power of love. This love is presented as the very operating system of heaven, and it supersedes every earthly law and power structure. So that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. In a world that's just full of power grabs, conflict, and control, what would it actually look like for us to operate from a place where love is understood not as a weakness, but as the ultimate, final, and most creative authority there is?